Our next story is also about a collection, though not nearly as big as the Record Center in number of pages, not nearly as big in size. And that's really what this story is about. It's about a little light reading. Usually, if you have a lot of books, you need a lot of space. They don't call this area of the library the stacks for nothing. Still, almost since the beginning of bookmaking, there have always been a few people who've been trying to shrink all of this down a bit. Or shrink it down a lot. At Washington University's Olin Library, they had an exhibit of miniature books, from an ancient Japanese scroll to a modern-day microchip, and lots in between.
Extremes are fascinating to people. The highest mountain, the deepest abyss, and so forth.
In Julian Edison's case, the fascination was with the smallest books in the world. These are all his, and just a fraction of a collection that has taken decades to assemble.
When I got married almost 50 years ago, my wife, on the first year of our marriage, which is paper anniversary, gave me a 9-volume set of the complete plays of William Shakespeare in miniature format.
And that was the start of what would become one of the premier collections of miniature books, defined as any book that's smaller than 3 inches by 3 inches. Now, the one thing I did know to do was to bring my reading glasses.
Oh, okay.
But sometimes you'll need a lot more than that. Some miniature books actually came with miniature magnifying glasses. Those were mostly gifts and novelties. But with a lot of miniatures, the books are small, but the print really isn't. Many of these were made to be read and easily carried. Is some of this perhaps printed and small because you can hide it and keep it from being found?
That's possibly one reason, indeed. Certainly maybe the facts, the Fruits of Philosophy, the first book on contraception, was probably done in that way. At one point in England, Bibles were not permitted, and I assume that some were smuggled across in miniature format.
Edison, the former Edison Brothers executive, has traveled the world to bookstores, auction houses, flea markets, sales of all kinds, and he was after quality more than quantity. Books in certain categories, unusual books, books with historic significance.
These books, the gigantic histories, 1800, are the first 2 books that were produced for children for amusement, not for morality or religion.
Or specialized interests, and there's always a market, I guess, for erotica.
Yes,
centuries.
I would say so, indeed, you bet.
And the smokers?
Smokers.
Is that a cookbook here?
That's a cookbook. That's a cookbook. That's its cover, and there's one of the inside pages.
There's a whole genre of political and propaganda books promoting the Nazi Party, the Communist Party. There are miniature copies of the Emancipation Proclamation and miniatures supporting the candidacy of Theodore Roosevelt.
In about 50 pages. It was produced in English, German, Danish, and Hebrew.
So this is an example of, while the page is small, the typeface is not that small, really.
Well, the typeface here in this particular thing is about like newspaper type, today's newspaper type.
A common question is, how did they make these? Well, some were done by amazingly steady hands, but Edison has a copy of the smallest book ever made with movable type. Every letter was set individually.
The story goes that the compositor's eyesight was injured in putting all of these type fonts together in a 207-page work. You have people around the world competing to produce the smallest book, just from a competitive point of view.
And people like you who want them.
Well, certainly, because it's an interesting aspect, tiny as it may be, of the whole genre of the miniature book world.
And that is something Julian Edison knows a lot about. He was editor of Miniature Book News for more than 40 years and recently published his own full-sized book about his own collection, which is still growing, though not as fast.
I'm on the hunt for the unusual.
He has a Babylonian tablet in the collection. He has a book by Pablo Picasso. In fact, many of today's makers of miniatures are artists. Edison can tell you a lot about these books, but he can't tell you which one is his favorite. That, he says, would be like picking a favorite grandchild. Each book is special in its own little way.
Every book has a story, no question about that. That's the fun of collecting anything.